call this meeting to order, and we'll go through and do a roll call. Councillor McCrae.
Here.
Councillor Dunsmore.
Present.
Councillor Kittredge. I don't see him there. Councillor McElwain. Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Present.
Councillor Foster.
Present. Testing.
Okay.
Present.
Yeah, we can hear you. We'll keep our eye open for Councillor Kittredge. From our closed meeting, oh, sorry, any disclosure of pecuniary interest with anything on our agenda today? Okay, seeing none, we had a closed session. The Council of and I have a recommendation on a closed session that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington. Oh no, anything to report out of our closed session? Please hold. Recommendation out of our closed session that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington authorize staff to negotiate a sale price for the remaining lands on Gregson Court and authorize the CAO to sign the purchase and sale agreement for the said properties 181 and 171 in Gregson Court. Mover for that, please. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCrae. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to presentations, announcements. I have a brief county update to provide, and then we'll get to our committee updates. We had County Council on March 25th. County is moving forward with a number of critical infrastructure projects in 2021. We were out early, had our budget done nice and early. We were out early in the year, so we're getting really good competitive bids. And we're getting good prices for our infrastructure projects, so that's good, and hopefully it's the same sort of thing we'll find for our township projects as well. So I just wanted to highlight one project in Centre Wellington, and that's a replacement of the Bothwick drain on Wellington Road 18, approximately 2.5 kilometers east of Wellington Road 26 here in Centre Wellington. Project includes removal of the existing reinforced concrete structure, replacing it with a new precast box culvert structure with armor stone retaining walls and a new steel beam guide rail. So it's a $410,000 project, and it will require a full road closure, and information will be going out regarding that from the county. The county has also made a commitment to support municipally organized roadside cleanup events. For each of the county's member municipalities, the county will be waiving tipping fees for all the collected waste. We'll be providing and emptying the waste containers with county staff. They'll promote the event, and they'll provide any information resources. So any of the 7 municipalities are interested in moving ahead with the roadside cleanups. The county wants to make sure that it supports it as much as it can. Good news, all 14 of the county's libraries will be opening back up to customers on Thursday, April the 1st. A few restrictions there. Browsing will be limited to 30 minutes. Customers are asked to continue to call ahead and book a time for any public computer use. All library branches will also continue to offer curbside service. That's been very popular, and that will continue. And patrons must complete an active screening upon entry and adhere to all public health measures while inside the county's facilities. So that's this Thursday, so that's good news. And that's all I have from a county perspective. Committee updates. Councillor Foster, anything?
Thank you, Mayor. No report.
Thanks, Councillor Foster. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
The Heritage Committee continues to work at their task, reviewing heritage applications and also reviewing the heritage designated properties. One of the things we do definitely see the reports from Heritage Committee from time to time, so they continue in that We also continue to work as economic development and the subcommittee from economic development. And you can see various items coming forward. Even today we see on the budget or the agenda here, a little bit of discussion on our serviced industrial lands. So nothing in depth to report today.
Thanks, Councillor Van Leeuwen. Councillor McElwain?
No committee meetings.
Councillor Kitchus?
Nothing to report.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yep, Stephen updated you on economic development, so I'll just stick with CSAC. We received an update from staff on the vaccine clinic and how things are running there and how we're trying to coordinate those with the opening of the facilities now that we're moving into a different level. And so they updated us on how they were managing all that, and the committee was quite happy with what they received. We also received a report about the Church Street Recreation Link application that went into the Federal Healthy Communities Grant Program. And they're excited about, and hopeful that we get some of that money to develop that link. They were all for the link, so hopefully we get that grant. We received a report from the Matthew Allan, the same report or the same presentation that council got back at budget time. It was felt important that the CSAC committee understand exactly what's going on in the urban forest, and he gave us a great presentation, and the committee were happy to receive that. And finally, the majority of the meeting was spent on the McDonald Trust Fund. As you may remember, council sent it back to the CSAC committee to get their recommendations on how to move forward with some unfinished or projects that have stalled. And so the committee has reached out to those members of the community who received McDonald Trust Fund money and haven't completed their projects to report back either in writing or coming to our meeting on April 7th to discuss with the committee what's going on, and then the committee will make recommendations to council. So that's my report.
Thanks, Councillor Dunsmore. Councillor McCrae?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Quarterly QMS meeting. Water and wastewater operations continue to perform well despite challenges sourcing well repair parts, a few water main breaks associated with aging infrastructure, and residents continuing to flush wipes, gloves into our wastewater system that are clogging our pumps. Staff are focused on the continual improvement of our operations and systems, currently reinforcing our SCADA water management system's resiliency to cyber attacks, digitally mapping resident water issues to identify possible trends, and developing a 5-year trending data review of operations to improve checks for quality issues. GRCA. We updated our administrative bylaw to reflect provincial amendments to the Conservation Authorities Act, received separate presentations from the GRCA and Sustainable Brant, Better Brant Citizens Group regarding their responses to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs inquiry about growing the size of the Greenbelt. Staff provided an update on current watershed conditions and the effectiveness of the GRCA's flood management program and infrastructure during the March 2021 flood event. It is interesting to note that the Shan Dam successfully reduced water flow by 50 to 75% during the event. The Grand River Conservation Foundation Community Conservation Grant applications are now available to schools and groups undertaking conservation projects in Grand River watershed communities. Submissions will be accepted until April 30th. Details are available on the GRCA website. The GRCA's nightly camping reservation system opens April 6th and parks will open May 1st. Capacity will initially be limited to 50% with more washrooms and outhouses open, but showers will remain closed. There will be no group camping reservations this year due to COVID restrictions on group assembly sizes. Pools and splash pads, facility and boat rentals, as well as food concessions will not be available this year. The Elora Quarry will be open this year, along with tubing at the Elora Gorge. Both will be using an online pre-arrival reservation system to reserve a time to visit and rent a tube. The GRCA experienced a dramatic increase in membership sales during January and February of this year, reflecting a growing interest in outdoor activities. The $140 annual membership allows multiple entries to the GRCA's 10 parks and Luther Wildlife Management Area for up to 6 people in one vehicle or walking in. I mean, this is one heck of a bargain. Valid for 1 year from date of activation. It can be used during all 4 seasons in participating areas depending on each park's operating season. The Elora Quarry is not included in this membership. Healthy growth. The committee received and discussed a staff presentation on the St. David Street North reconstruction project. The committee then reviewed a work plan provided by staff, identifying areas for consideration in determining measures to promote more attainable housing in the community. Planning staff are working with University of Guelph students to identify a community attainable housing target. The target will also include units we should have built to date. The students are currently conducting the literature review. That's it.
Thanks, Councillor McCrae. Just before, we just wanted to mention, I should have mentioned it when I had the floor a while ago, but the Fergus BAA, working with our town staff to get ready for patio season and closing down Provost Lane. So really good things happening in both of our downtown cores with the patios and sidewalk displays. Hopefully passing council today so that can move, weather permitting, and things can open up in April. So a lot of merchants and a lot of restaurants and cafes are really excited about that. So just wanted to thank our staff for really good work and working with our BAAs to help them to kind of address some of the challenges that COVID has brought them with the restrictions and to open up as fast as possible. So I know that we moved really quickly as a staff team to address some of those concerns, and you see that in the policy that we talked about last week. Before we go on to confirmation of the agenda, I'd like to turn it over to our CEO to announce and present a new member of our team. Andy.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. It's with great pleasure today and excitement that I have the opportunity to introduce Rashad Hassan as our new manager of human resources. Rashad's first day is today, so his first day is right into a council meeting. Rashad has a wide-ranging background in municipal human resources through his work as the Director of Human Resources at the City of Fort St. John, BC. Before that, he worked at the City of Saskatoon as the Branch Manager of Organizational and Employee Development. Rashad also worked in Birmingham, UK for a number of years for the National Health Services. Rashad completed his Human Resources Management education from Birmingham City University in the UK and has a Bachelor's of Commerce from the University of Punjab. Rashad has experience in contract negotiations, labor relations, recruitment, learning and development, council remuneration, and strategic planning, to name a few. And we're very pleased that Rashad has joined his team. He's spent the last few weeks moving out from Fort St. John with his family, and we're glad that he's here today. Welcome, Rashad.
Yeah, on behalf of council, welcome to the Centre Wellington team. Hopefully you fit in nicely, and it's good luck on all the moving and all the practical things that you have to do to relocate here. I know it can't be easy with 3 kids, but welcome to Centre Wellington.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Moving on, I have a recommendation of the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington confirm the agenda for the meeting held March 29th, 2021. Can I have a mover for that, please? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCrae. All in favor? And that is carried. Moving on to confirmation of the minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes there. The public meeting, development charges committee of the whole from February the 18th minutes. And we also have our council February 22nd minutes. And I have a recommendation that the minutes of the committee of the whole dated February 18th, 2021 and the council meeting held February 22nd, 2021 be adopted as circulated. Have a mover for that, please. Councillor McElwain, seconded by Councillor McCrae. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Moving on to section 9, report from committee of the whole from March 22nd last week. I have a recommendation that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington approve the report from the committee of the whole dated March 22nd, 2021 as circulated. Can I have a mover for that, please? Councillor McCrae, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. Any discussion on that? All in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thank you very much. Moving on, we have no delegations today. Consideration of reports. We have the 2020 development charges background study and bylaw report. And I will turn it over to our Managing Director of Corporate Services, Dan Wilson. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. So just to briefly go through my report, we've gone through a fairly extensive process for our development charges bylaw this year. The background study was actually released to the public on December 23rd of 2020. There have been 2 addendum reports since that date, making revisions to our calculations and the bylaw itself. We did have a stakeholder meeting with the local builders and developers in Centre Wellington on February 2nd. That's not a statutory requirement. That's just our process and going above and beyond what's required in the Development Charges Act. The public meeting was held on February 18th. At that meeting, Watson and Associates answered all of council's questions and went through the calculation process of determining what our bylaw should be going forward. We had no public delegations at that meeting, and I'd like to think that's a direct result of us having a fairly interactive section with the stakeholder groups before that public meeting. So we are presented with a bylaw for adoption today. It has all of the calculations as shown in the background study and the 2 addendum reports combined. I've outlined the changes in rates in my report itself. One thing I'd like to point out is that the last column on page 2 of my report, the numbers will be slightly less than what is shown there. We had previously had the consultant do indexing at 2.6% going from 2020 to 2021, where the actual index should be 2.3%. So it's just a very minor reduction in rates as compared to what's shown on page 2 of my report. We did do a comparability analysis as part of this process. Watson and Associates looked at neighboring and comparable municipalities, and we are either in the middle of the pack or slightly below middle of the pack in terms of both residential and non-residential DC rates. That's our proposed new rates. So what we're proposing is there's a number of recommendations to be passed, and that's coming right out of the DC background study itself. And then there's an adoption of a report, a bylaw later in the agenda today to actually make this change official effective tomorrow morning. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Thanks very much, Dan. I'm going to get the recommendation on the floor first, and then I'll turn it over to council. It's a fairly long one, so stick with me here. For recommendation that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington approve the following recommendations related to the Township 2020 Development Charges Background Study, that classes of service be established for growth studies in public works, facilities, vehicles, and equipment, that the Township continue the approach of calculating water and wastewater development charges on a uniform urban area basis and all other development charges on a uniform township-wide basis, that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington approve the capital project listing set out in Chapter 5 of the Development Charges Background Study dated December 23rd, 2020 as amended, subject to further annual review and approvals during the capital budget process. That the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington approve the Development Charges Background Study dated December 23rd, 2020 as amended. That the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington determines that no further public meetings are required. That the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington approves the development charges bylaw as set out in the Appendix G to the background study as amended. Can I have a mover for that, please? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCrae. Questions from council? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. I generally agree with the report. My only question, Mayor, is that I'd like to have seen us do this ourselves in-house. Dan, can you help me understand why we couldn't do this asset allocation work, this cost accounting in-house on our own?
Dan?
Yeah, through Mayor Linton, there's an extensive amount of work involved in doing a development charge background study. It almost off and on throughout the last year, it took a number of hours of work on the consulting side. In addition to that, this type of process is open to appeal through the LPAT system. And I don't know of any municipalities that do development charge background studies internally, given that you need that professional expertise to help you defend any appeals at LPAT.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
No, I have no questions. It's good to get this done for the year.
Councillor McElwain?
Thanks, Mayor. I just have one clarification, I guess. The residential change in the development charges going up about, I think it's about 14%, and non-residential about 20%. Does that all is that all immediate, or is it phased in over the 5-year period of the development charges study?
Dan?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Linton. The recommended changes are proposed to take effect immediately as of tomorrow morning. Yeah, there's no recommended phase in at this point.
Councillor Dunsmore? Sorry, Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few questions. I'd first like to know from Dan, are we comparing the proposed calculated DC rates 2021 with the existent developing charges 2021 for the comparison of how the rates change?
Dan?
Yes, through Mayor Linton. Yeah, the survey compares our calculated new rates for 2021 to other municipalities' rates effective January 1st of 2021. So we did have slightly lower rates in early 2021, but we're now suggesting a minor increase as part of this background study. But we are comparing similar rates, 2021 rates across the comparison.
Councillor Kittredge, follow on? Councillor Kittredge, you're on mute.
Thank you, Mayor. If I were to compare with page 40, which were the existing charges with the on page 41 with the proposed, would that be accurate? Because I have some problems with this. Basically, you've kind of increased them slightly, but you've reduced the Parks and Rec almost 28%, and also the sewage treatment, you've reduced that also, and especially on the multiple units. And the problem I have is that when we got the Parks and Rec and when we had the budget, we're shortfalled with parkland, and so you're cutting the funding on that, and also we're slotted to have an improvement to cost for the Fergus sewage plant in the future, and you're reducing those costs. So I'm just wondering, like, you've increased where you have the roadside, but those two ones where we have potential shortfalls, you're actually reducing the rates. So I'm just wondering, like, how that got through.
Yeah, I'll turn it to Dan in a second, but I just wanted to let people know that these questions were answered in the public meeting. So just want to let people know that this has gone through a pretty rigorous discussion already, but I'll turn it over to Dan.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Linton, I'll try to address all of the questions at once. So the development charge background study, the capital projects, most of the capital projects going into the calculation are coming from council approved master plans. There was a significant change in the recommended capital projects in the previous Parks and Rec master plan to what was recommended in the most recent master plan. In addition to that, we do have a lot more growth included in the calculation of development charges now, because we're going out to 2041, where the previous development charge background study only went out to 2031. You pointed out parkland. One of the requirements in the Development Charges Act is that you cannot use development charges to fund parkland. You can only use development charges to fund amenities or improvements on parkland. So the fact that we need so many more acres or hectares of parkland cannot be considered in the calculation of development charges, only the amenities to go on top of that parkland. When it comes to wastewater, again, this is straight mathematics in terms of capital requirements to 2041 divided by growth to 2041. Based on figures that we've discussed with Colin's team, there's still quite a bit of capacity in the Fergus wastewater treatment plant. That means that there isn't that much in terms of expansion required to 2041. Like some of the expansion we're suggesting to do to 2041 will benefit population beyond 2041. And as part of the DC calculation, we can only include capital projects to service the population to 2041. So as we do further development charge studies every 5 years, we'll bring more and more of that wastewater treatment plant into the calculation, but legislation prohibits us from doing any more at this time.
I just wanted to make a comment. This process, as Dan's speaking about it, this is not Dan making policy decisions. This is a very prescriptive process that's established by the province of Ontario. And that's why we have Watson to interpret what that means based on our master planning process that council approved. So again, our staff aren't making policy decisions. They're not choosing to go in a direction. This is a very prescriptive approach. It's just applying provincial rules and regulations to our situation. Councillor Kitchers, follow on.
Thank you, Mayor. So in 4 years' time, 4 to 5 years' time, we won't be needing any increased capacity at the Fergus, because I've seen it always on the capital budgets that we pass each year that's prescribed to, you know, borrow $25 million. So you're saying that we don't need that now. Is that what you're saying?
Dan?
Thank you. Through Mayor Linton, what I'm saying is only part of that expansion is due to growth to 2041. If you look at the capital sheet in the background study for wastewater, it shows the expansion required to the plant, but it also shows what they're referring to as a post-period benefit. So that post-period benefit is to accommodate growth beyond 2041. So that's information or amounts that we'll collect in future development charges, starting with the update we do 5 years from now.
Councillor Dunsmore?
I'm happy with the report, Dan, and I see the amount of work that's gone into it. So I appreciate all the work you've done.
Councillor McCrae?
Thank you, Marilyn. Yes, I found the report quite thorough, and yeah, I'm happy with it.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillors, call the question. All in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thanks very much, Dan. Moving on to 11.2, request for proposal, municipal class environmental assessment for structure 16WG. Turn it back to Dan.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Before I get into the procurement aspects of this report, I'd like Colin to go over some of the scope of work.
Yeah, will do. Thanks, Dan. So yeah, the scope of work, this is a class environmental assessment completed under the Municipal Engineers Association Class EA guidance. And similar to previous EAs that we've done for structures, we're looking at completing a background review, data compilation and analysis, looking at inventories, natural inventories of the area and assessments. We'll complete an environmental impact assessment, cultural heritage environmental report, tree inventory, hydraulic analysis, topographic survey of the area to inform the design, and hydraulic analysis. Then we'll go into developing alternatives and evaluating those alternatives, identifying the preferred alternative, and then preparing the Class EA document at the end of it. In terms of public consultation, again, we'd normally be having public information centers or public open houses for these, but we have included an opportunity for a virtual public open house that we'll be hosting later this year. And of course, the regular notices that are sent out electronically and then put in the Wellington Advertiser will be completed as well. We'll also be setting up the website connectcw.ca with all the documentation and opportunities for consultation on the website. And and then of course with agencies too, I think I mentioned previously that this is a location with a species at risk. So we're anticipating a red-side dace, which is a protected little fish that calls the Irvine Creek its home. And so we do have some consultation to do with M&R and DFO, also GRCA in terms of floodplain and working within the regulatory area. So all this work is wrapped into this environmental assessment. Back to you, Dan.
Thank you, Colin. So we did a request for proposal for this project. There were 13 registered plan takers, and we did receive 7 bids. The bids were scored from a selection committee made up of Colin and the Managing Director of Engineering and the Asset Management and Capital Project Manager. They did evaluate each of the responses based on various criteria identified in my report, including the cost. The selection committee's recommendation is to award this proposal to the highest scored proponent, which is McIntosh Perry Consulting Engineers Limited. And the upset limit is $78,692 plus HST. In my financial implication section, you'll see when we add the non-rebate HST to that, we're looking at a total cost of just over $80,000. With a budget of $100,000, we're roughly $20,000 under budget, which is great news.
Yeah, that is really good news, Dan. Colin, a quick question for you before I read the recommendation.
Sure.
Red Side Dace, is that, do they really call their Irvine Creek home, or is that allegedly? Have you seen one yet?
Yeah, so we did some DNA testing of the water column throughout the Irvine Creek. So this was part of Bridge 27 WG replacement a few years ago. And we've been studying them. So although we haven't physically seen them, they have left a trace. So their DNA traces in the water column itself. It's a pretty cutting edge analysis that's happening. So it does tell us they are there. They're pretty elusive. We haven't found them, but we know they are present. So that puts us into that process for permits from DFO.
Okay, thanks for that interesting update. I'm gonna read the recommendation, get a mover and seconder, and then ask council for questions, comments. Recommendation of the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington award request for proposal number 21-21 municipal class environmental assessment for structure 16 WG to McIntosh Perry Consulting Engineers Limited at a total upset limit of $78,692 excluding HST. Can I get a mover for that, please? Councillor McCray, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. Questions from council? Councillor McCray.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I have no questions.
Councillor Dunsmore.
No questions.
Councillor Kittredge.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm glad that we're moving ahead with this because it was closed, and so it's a very quick turnaround to start to replace it.
Councillor McElwain.
No questions.
Councillor Van Leeuwen.
No questions.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one quick question. Colin, was there any heritage aspects to this bridge? And was there any discussion on the heritage part of it, if any?
Thank you for your question through Mayor Linton. So we will be completing a cultural heritage evaluation report. So that will inform us as to any sort of heritage value of the existing structure. And so from that, we'll have recommendations in terms of the the next steps in terms of the heritage.
All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Dan. Moving on to 11.3, proposed revisions to councillor committee appointments. And that's a report by myself. And so I will read the recommendation first, get a mover and seconder, then I'll start, and then we'll go around the table. I have a recommendation of the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington approve the following committee appointments. Councillor Dunsmore replacing Mayor Linton on the Fergus BAA. Councillor McElwain replacing Councillor Van Leeuwen on Heritage Centre Wellington, and Councillor Van Leeuwen replacing Councillor Foster on the Healthy Growth Advisory Committee effective April 1st, 2021. And I will move that. Can I get a seconder for that, please? Councillor Dunsmore. And I will talk a little bit about it first, and then we'll go around the room. I think it's a good, first of all, I think it's a good practice to have a Fergus-based councillor on the Fergus BAA. With my additional responsibilities with the county, it's difficult for me to do their meetings every month. So I think it makes more sense for Councillor Dunsmore to take that over from me. Heritage Centre Wellington could benefit from Councillor McElwain's longstanding council experience and community involvement. I think that would be a good fit for him. Healthy Growth Advisory Committee has decided to focus their attention on developing recommendations to council. I think it's very critical that the councillors on this committee share this vision and contribute to positive results. I want to make a couple comments about that. For the past 3 meetings of the Healthy Growth Advisory Committee, Councillor Foster has dominated the discussion on items that aren't on the committee's agenda. And I think this gets to the proper role for councillors on advisory committees. It's to be the liaison back to council, to inform this body of the discussions that took place at the committee level. It's not the role of councillor to direct or dominate the discussions, and that's what Councillor Foster, in my opinion, has been doing over the past 3 months. Healthy Growth Advisory Committee has decided to focus their efforts on attainable housing. The committee is made up of some really excellent citizen members who've been selected because of their skill set, because of their experience in their area of specialty, and we need to hear from them. That's absolutely critical. And we can't have this committee meetings dominated by a councillor. That's not the role of a councillor on our committees. I'm repeating that, and that's what this council is for, and that's not what committees are for. And increasing the supply of attainable housing is way too important an issue for this community to have a councillor block the progress by continuing to bring up items that are outside of the agenda. If Councillor Foster isn't replaced by another councillor, we will lose committee members. I can't stand by and allow this to happen. We need this committee to provide recommendations to council to help us achieve attainable housing options in this town. That's absolutely paramount. And so making this change, I believe, is absolutely critical to achieving this result. So for that reason, I'm moving ahead with this motion for council to consider. Councillor Foster?
Well, thank you, Mayor, for your remarks and your comments. Mayor, it's very obvious to me that yourself and staff want me removed from the Growth Committee because I've asked for compliance with Section 3 of the Planning Act. And I've advocated strongly for compliance with Section 3 of the Planning Act, that heritage areas be conserved because it's the law in Ontario. Mayor, we don't have a choice in that matter. Heritage areas have to be conserved. Even if attainable housing is a laudable goal, we cannot use that goal to be out of compliance with the Planning Act. We have to comply. I also note, Mayor, that the minutes from the Growth Committee meetings are not accurate. They do not reflect the discussion. The minutes don't record the consensus of this committee that we have to comply with the Section 3 of the Planning Act. I also note that 75% of my Ward 3 is in the Fergus Heritage area. That's been named in our official plan. and this heritage area has to be conserved. Now, the Planning Act requires conservation of heritage areas, even when attainable housing is a laudable goal. And I've received several letters of support from constituents on my position on this matter. I also note that 75% of the Elora heritage area is in Councillor McRae's ward, who's largely been silent on this issue at the Growth Committee meetings. Will you stand with me, Councillor McRae, for heritage conservation, or will you vote to remove me from this committee so that Section 3 of the Planning Act can be ignored? I think the citizens of our community need to decide whether they want to conserve or destroy our heritage areas, and this is going to be a key election issue. Myself, I stand for heritage conservation, and this is why, Mayor, you want me moved from this committee. This decision is going to leave Historic Fergus unrepresented on the Growth Committee, and there's nothing healthy about that. And I urge you, my colleagues, to vote against this decision, and I call for a recorded vote on this matter.
Thanks, Councillor Foster. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Yeah, in this matter, I've always said that I will work in any committee and where I'm best needed. And if this is an area where I can help out and assist with, I'm willing to be there. I cannot speak towards the meetings at this point as I've not been in them, but I do believe that that we need to focus on what's important and move forward. So if we can shuffle the committees, it's helpful for our township to move forward in a good way, then I'm willing to do that.
Councillor McElwain?
Thank you. I guess first of all, I'm excited to finally be back on an advisory committee because it's been a long haul where I wasn't allowed to do that. So that's good news. As far as Councillor Foster's removal, I guess my question is, if it was one of our citizen members of the committee who was objecting to some part of the staff agenda, would they be removed as well? I mean, are we setting a precedent here that says councillors have to follow the company line? I don't know. I'm not sure what the guidelines are that are being followed here that suggest that the mayor can have somebody pulled off a committee because that person is not necessarily agreeing with other members of the committee at any given time. So it's kind of like Councillor Van Leeuwen being removed as deputy mayor. I said the same thing then. We're setting a precedent here that I think we need to have a process in place and identified before we start doing it. Because as I say, what if it's one of the community members that is objecting to some part of the growth committee or any other committee as far as that goes? Or is it only councillors? Do they have to have to follow the staff's guidelines more than anybody else? Those rules, I think, need to be defined. And I know, by the way, one of the other things that Councillor Foster asked about in the last meeting, I don't know if the other two meetings you referred to, he did it or not, but was a suggestion that the attainable housing direction be brought forward to council. And I don't disagree with that either. I think it's true in economic development. I think it's true in growth management, and probably every one of our advisory committees, that council be advised of what the direction of the committee is, and give approval that yes, you should go forward with this, because otherwise, I mean, the attainable housing strategy is quite detailed and quite extensive. And if after spending a year getting to a recommendation and it comes to council and council says, well, that's not really what we want. That's a waste of a lot of very valuable time and some really good committee members. So why doesn't it come to council before it goes forward in the committee? So yeah, I had a lot of questions about this.
And I'll respond to some of those questions after all the councillors have had an opportunity to speak. Councillor Kittredge.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm kind of disturbed by this motion. Generally, even the rationale given is disturbing in the sense of there's lots of talk about teamwork, but teamwork seems to be think like certain people, or you get kicked off or not given certain committees. And so with that in mind, I'd like to actually make a motion to refer back to staff to develop a committee appointment policy and review of appointments with objective justification and rotation. So I'd like to motion that, go back to staff to do that. I think that we need to take the subjectivity and the bias out of selections. And for myself, I've been on, I have only county positions. I've been on farm safety for 6 years, 3 terms, and I will now be for 8 years, 4 terms consecutively. And I will be on social housing, which is a county thing. We only have 1. It should be eliminated really as a committee. And it only meets half. And I've been on that for, I guess, 6 years now, 3 consecutive terms. And now we'll be on a 4th, which will be 8 years. And it's pretty, I think it's pretty blatant to me, and I think to the community, that if the mayor doesn't like you, he puts you out into the outer limits. And it's just, if you see Councillor McElwain has suffered from that, and now Councillor Foster will now, and I have for a long time. And I think we need a little bit of objectivity in this, so that it's taken out of what would be called politics. And we all have qualifications equal. We were all elected by the public. And I think a rotation and taking it out of the political sphere of subjectivity by the mayor would be a very healthy thing to go forward with. So I have that motion on the floor.
Yeah, no, there's no motion on the floor at this point. We have another one. Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. The waste of valuable time was brought up. And so when I saw this motion on the agenda, I reached out to several members of the committee. And that was exactly what they said, that their being there was a waste of time, because in an hour-long meeting, 3/4 of an hour was taken up by Councillor Foster speaking about it. At the start of this council term, we had a heated discussion on what the role of the councillor was on a citizens advisory committee. And it was suggested by some that we be the chairs of that committee. And I spoke against that at that point, because citizens advisory committee are our opportunity to hear from citizens. And if we're running the agenda as a chair, that can usurp that authority. So I always said that we should just be there primarily to listen. And that's my goal on all the committees that I'm on, is to listen more than I speak. And if ever I break that, I would suggest that the members of those committees contact the mayor and have me removed from those committees. So it is my firm belief that having a councillor who has a voice at this table on these issues and can voice that opinion here at this table they should be doing more listening so that the committee can move forward with the views and understand where citizens on that committee are focused. So for that reason, I support this.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Litton. I too have heard from other committee members, and frankly, Councillor Foster's actions are disruptive to the committee's efforts to address the attainable housing crisis affecting our community. The citizen-led committee chose to focus its current efforts on attainable housing and not heritage. Our role as councillors on the committee is to listen, provide council's perspective, and provide support to the citizen committee. We are not to impose our views to the point of stifling debate or pushing our agenda. His efforts to steer the conversation towards heritage waste time and money, creating frustration and delaying the committee's focus on attainable housing. The committee needs to identify ways to encourage a broader range of rental and purchasable housing to match our community's various income ranges. Frankly, the committee needs to start showing some results.
And I just make one last comment. I heard this a couple times. It has nothing to do with what Councillor Foster believes. It has to do with the role of a councillor on a committee, and that's not to dominate the discussion. I don't want to lose these excellent volunteer committee members. And if meetings go on the way they have been going on, I guarantee you we will lose those committee members. And that is not an option that I'm or any of council should be interested in going down. This attainable housing in Centre Wellington is far too important an issue to have it not move ahead with some real practical action based on this committee. And as far as recommendations from this committee, everything that this committee recommends always will come back to council. That's the way our advisory committees operate. It always comes back to council for council's discussion. Any last comments from members of council? Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks, Marilyn. Yeah, considering, especially like some of the conversation from Councillor McElwain and Dunsmore in this, as I sit on Heritage Committee, it's something that I find very important that I sit and listen as a liaison, but not steer that committee and not to try to direct that committee, being that they come forward with their recommendations to council. Sometimes I can give advice or into different areas, but not to drive a direction within those committees per se. So I am concerned. I also have heard from a few committee members, and I think all council received a few emails there. I guess for myself, I look at it in the aspect of I enjoy heritage, but I enjoy all aspects, and I'm willing to move around if that's what's best for the committees and for the community. So to get the work done we need to do as council. Thanks.
Councillor Kittress?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't really understand why my motion is not allowed, since it is not actually interfering with this, but it's a provision so that in the future, these committee appointments will be more justified and have better rotation. And so it's asking staff to do that. And it's relevant to the actual topic that we're discussing, but it's referring back to staff to create that policy so that it looks more objective so I don't see anything wrong with that. And second of all, to just sort of say, like, the BIA, it says you need a Fergus representative. It would be really good to have a representative that has actually business experience. Myself, I have 34 years in business, and last year was one of my best years because I have a very strategic and creative background in business. And so I'm just wondering, like, when you make the appointments and they're so random and there's no justification for those, then it just sort of looks like favoritism. And I think that is not very good for the image of Centre Wellington. I think if there was an objective policy where how the rotation came out, then that would be better for Centre Wellington Council.
Just to confirm, Councillor Kittredge, the reason that we didn't go with your motion is because, like I always do, I go around the room first, so that's why we didn't get to that. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks, Mayor. Sorry, I just wanted to say, can we pick up on that, on Councillor Kittredge's motion there to refer something to staff after this? I do think that it's a good idea to get some type of policy for the future councils as well as it goes into the future. But I don't know where I believe we have to move here today, but I have good policy or direction on who's best suited into a committee is a good discussion point.
Yeah, and just to confirm, what Councillor Kittredge is talking about is in our procedures bylaw, which we will be getting to. It's not tied back to this. This is consistent with the approach that we take for committee appointments. And there's language in there in the procedures bylaw, which is going to be coming to council anyway. So my suggestion is we cover that off and have a fulsome discussion on that at the right time. Councillor McCrae?
Thank you, Marilyn. I just wanted to add that if the public's interested, they should watch the meeting video from February to get an appreciation of the challenge we've been facing.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, just to respond to Councillor Kittredge, he said that this is a willy-nilly appointment just out of the blue. You're not the only one on this committee with business experience. In fact, I have 10 years of storefront retail business experience. I know the vast majority of the retailers in downtown Fergus. I talk with them on a regular basis as my job as a councillor. So this isn't a willy-nilly appointment. I do have experience in retail business, and I believe that's why the mayor appointed me.
Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor, first of all. As I explained previously about my appointments, with the appointment of Councillor Dunsmore to this, he will have 3 prominent committees that are advisory locally. I have none. And I haven't had none, I've had none for 6 years. I mean, except for the economic development, which I contributed greatly in suggesting some of the more innovative ideas when I was on it. But there again, when you ask some challenging questions, you get taken off. And so I think that this policy that I am, and that the staff develop, and the justification and the rotation, I believe that everyone here is elected and there should be rotation, more rotation, not less, because everyone needs a turn to be on these committees so that they can bring to council, as it's been suggested, they listen to them and then they talk about them. And so that's what is about. And the more you have rotation and the more you have the justification for how it's done, is better for the community. And that's what I'm talking about. In terms of, I don't doubt that you have some business experience, Mr. Dunsmore, but I do too. And I'm just saying that you're on 3 prominent ones, and also now the deputy mayor, and I have none. And I sort of think that the objectivity of that, when I get citizen feedback, is like, well, what's happened here? And so we need to look like we are being objective and not subjective in making these decisions. And that's why I put forward the motion, so that we should pursue that. And I think that Councillor Van Leeuwen has supported that, and I think that's what we should do.
Any other comments, Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. I wish to make testing the audio. There we go. Thank you, Mayor. I wish to make three points, which I believe are important. First of all, there's been talk of disruption, me being disruptive on the committee. I, for one, firmly believe in upholding the law of Ontario and the law of Canada. And it is the law that, it's the Planning Act law that I advocated for. Now, if that is disruptive, then so be it. To do otherwise would mean that we are lawless. And I, for one, am not lawless, and I'm fully prepared to defend the rule of law in our community. I'm also prepared to defend the importance of the Planning Act. And what I find disruptive is how we often squelch debate. We squelch any dissenting opinion. This is what is known as groupthink, and it's not productive, the squelching of debate. The second point I want to make is, yes, I realize attainable housing is a very important goal, and I do support finding solutions. But I do not for a minute believe that we can use attainable housing to trump heritage conservation. We cannot use attainable housing to trump Section 3 of the Planning Act. The Attainable Housing Bill is not able to trump or supersede the Ontario Planning Act. It's simply not the case. So I have spoken in favor of compliance with the law and upholding the law. If that's disruptive, so be it. The last point I want to make, Mayor, is just a short time ago, you had lost confidence in Councillor Van Leeuwen as Deputy Mayor. And here, just a few weeks later, you want to put Councillor Van Leeuwen on the Growth Committee for all of the above reasons. I have to say, sir, there's a great deal of hypocrisy and politics involved with this decision, and I think you'll be judged accordingly, sir.
Yeah, thanks for that advice, Councillor Foster. Thanks for putting words in my mouth that I've never said, but what else is new? I'm going to call to question this one. All in favor of this recommendation? Opposed? And that carries. Thank you very much. Moving on to
Point of order, Your Worship. We had a request for a recorded vote on this earlier.
Oh, right. Yes. Thanks for reminding me of that, Councillor Dunsmore. I'll turn it over to the clerk for a recorded vote.
Sorry, through you, Your Worship, Councillor Van Leeuwen,
Yes.
Councillor Foster,
No.
Councillor McIlwain,
No.
Councillor McCrae,
Yes.
Councillor Kittredge,
No.
Councillor Dunsmore,
Yes.
and Mayor Linton.
Yes.
That carries.
Okay, moving on to section 12, neighborhood wellness, and we have a proposed amendment motion from Councillor Kittredge that was deferred from January 19th. So I'll allow him to go through his amended motion, and then we're going, before questions, we're going to also allow our communications director to present a neighborhood approach, a potential neighborhood approach, and then following that, we'll go into council discussion. So I'll turn things over to Councillor Kittredge.
Thank you, Mayor. So I listened to the video and the recommendations made at that meeting by council staff, council, and then I reached out to the CAO and asked if there was any staff input, and the CAO directed that staff member Kendra Martin was interested in working with what I had suggested. We had a conversation and then she shared some notes that she had. And so as a result of that, I rewrote the motion with the considerations of what council had suggested, and through talking with Kendra Martin. So I'm going to read the new motion. It reads as, whereas isolation, alienation, and loneliness are major causes of mental health issues in society and in municipalities. And whereas a community is changing rapidly through growth of subdivisions and intensification of neighborhoods, there is isolation and estrangement from your surroundings and your neighborhood. And whereas we on council can acknowledge that the pandemic 2020-21 and the public health restriction mandates experienced and currently in effect have affected the financial, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being of the members of our community because of social distancing, mask wearing, social limiting activities outside of your social bubble, employment loss, and business closures. And whereas mental wellness is vital for farm communities, not just urban environments. And whereas the Municipal Act section 24A and B reads, it is the role of council, A, to represent the public and to concise with well-being and interests of the municipality, and B, to develop and evaluate the policies and programs of the municipality. And whereas the Municipality of Centre Wellington Strategic Plan 2018 to 2022 seeks to promote active and caring community, in particular to support the caring organizations within the community and prioritize mental health as part of our safe communities. Now, therefore, the Council of Centre Wellington should form a community well-being and neighborhood hospitality task force consisting of 1 councillor and 6 citizens chosen by staff member Kendra Martin on behalf of staff, with an application process for the purpose of enhancing the mental and emotional health of our community through building neighborhoods of social interaction and the start of recruitment after this motion passes. And further, that each ward have a representative and there is at least 1 rural resident member, if possible, from community applicants. And further, that the task force, once the community members are chosen, meet for 3 months and put together a neighborhood and hospitality document and present that to the CSAC committee with approval to council to be passed. And further, the task force will establish a document that gives the content of how to start a neighborhood group, how to organize with guidelines and etiquette for events on public properties and or on private properties, and a sampling of activities that can be organized or be spontaneous gestures to enhance hospitality to new neighbors and the wellness of the neighborhood. And further, that financial considerations will be established by the task force and presented to CSAC committee and the council for approval. And further, that I would like to sit on this task force as a council representative until the document is finished and passed by council and advertised to the citizens of Centre Wellington. And further, that once passed by council staff member Kendra Martin, the community coordinator will be the liaison person for residents and the neighborhood events requiring some finances, made presentations to the CSAC committee for approval. And so that's the gist of it. It is basically very grassroots. It's starting with what the neighbors that are chosen from the different wards and hopefully some rural residents come up with. And then it's really basically goes back to the CSAC committee. And that's partly why I just put on 1 councillor, which is myself, because I've initiated this idea. And after talking to Kendra, she seemed to know a fair bit about what she had some experience. And I thought, don't really need 2 councillors for that. And I thought that she had a good handle on what this could be a benefit for our community. So if you have any questions, you can ask them.
Thanks, Councillor Kittredge. And we'll go right into Kendra presenting your approach there, and then we'll open it up for questions from council. Welcome, Kendra.
Thank you, Mayor Linton and council, for having me this afternoon. I'm just going to quickly start with a presentation I pulled together. It just kind of brings together everything that I was thinking about this. And I do want to thank Councillor Kittredge. As I was listening in on the meeting in January, many of his points resonated with me because I do monitor our Facebook and Twitter account. I do hear often in the community that people do feel as they're moving to the community, they're not really involved in much. And I think COVID has really played on that. People just don't have the opportunity to meet their neighbors at this time when we're trying to stay home and stay away from gatherings. So next slide, please. So some background, in January, Councillor Kittredge brought this forward. In his initial one, he had recommended 2 councillors and 6 citizens for the purpose of enhancing mental and emotional health of community through neighborhood networks and social interaction. Staff agree that neighborhood connectivity is extremely important and should be made a priority. We agree as well that a grassroots approach is important to this, especially in a year where we're still dealing with COVID. We don't know when we're going to be out of this, and we don't know when we can start interacting with our neighbors the way that we have in the past. So we are recommending that a 1-year pilot project be formed to bring together community members. Our youth committee, unfortunately, that's been put on hold. Last year, many of our youth members went away to university. So this year was going to be a relaunch of that. But after discussing with the principal of the high schools, we kind of just took a backwards, approach to maybe launch this again this September, hopefully when things are back to normal and our youth committee can get re-engaged in this process. And create this a neighborhood grant connectivity program. And this program will be designed to bring neighborhoods together with assistance from the township. Next slide. A goal of creating connected neighborhoods is encouraging neighborhoods to interact. When neighbors know neighbors, they have someone nearby they can go to for help. It's that age old, you ran out of sugar and you're in the middle of making a cake and you can run over to the neighbor's house and ask for a cup of flour or sugar. They feel safe when they know their neighbors, and they feel a stronger sense of community and belonging. Next slide. Rationale behind this is the township already supports community initiatives through grants, staff resources, and other programs that community members value and make an important contribution to our community's development. Neighborhood connectivity ensures we're all connecting our residents and maintaining our small town feel. It's been proven in other communities that neighborhood community building should be resident-led. Community building in neighborhoods is most successful when residents make the changes they want to see in their neighborhoods and when activities represent the interest of the broader neighborhood community. The township's role is to support these grassroots neighborhood initiatives. Next slide. So the next steps that we were thinking would to be move forward with a pilot project that would see up to 3 neighborhoods receive grants for neighborhood projects for a total of $3,000. So this is $1,000 per project. Shortlisted projects would be vetted by staff, council, and the youth committee. Grants would be approved by the Community Services Advisory Committee based on the guidelines established for the neighborhood grants. And the goal is to have township staff work together with the neighborhood groups to successfully create these projects. When an idea is not feasible due to legislative, financial, or policy constraints or public safety concerns, then the township will assist residents to explore other options or help them achieve these goals. Next steps, or next slide. So we're looking for council to move forward with this initiative. From there, we'll create guidelines and event information forms that neighborhoods can fill out and have approved by staff and CSAC as part of their grant submission. Get the community involved. We're thinking more this fall to come up with a name for this. Maybe the winning community neighborhood that chooses the name for this program is our first grant recipient. Next year, we can involve the youth committee in building and promoting this program, getting it out to the neighborhoods, getting everyone excited about this. We'll bring a realistic plan to the 2020 budget deliberations for the first pilot year of the program. And then next May, start promoting and deadlines and submission and all of that. And that would take place from May to December of next year. So people can start planning their events and hosting them and all of that fun stuff. Next slide. That's probably it. And I'll take any questions now.
Great, thanks very much, Councillor Kittredge and Kendra. So we have two similar objectives, different approaches, two similar objectives. So I'm just going to open that up to council to talk about both approaches. I think from the conversation that we had back in January, a number of us, if not all of us, really recognized that there was something to this suggestion of Councillor Kittredge's, that we really identified a need and we want to do whatever we could to address this need. So I'll just at this point turn it over to discussions from council and see where this takes us. And we'll start with Councillor McCrae.
Thank you, Mary Lynn. I'd like to say, first of all, thank you to Councillor Kittredge and to Kendra for flagging this and giving us an opportunity to do something for our residents. It's sort of, I find it challenging. While I see both are complementary, I still see there's some differences. And what I'd like to suggest is I really like the idea of the youth council being involved. And could this be something that maybe the youth council runs with as opposed to council? So giving them the lead. I'm also thinking, would it be worthwhile to basically poll the community to find out what are they thinking in terms of this? Since we are saying that the idea is to have this be a grassroots resident run initiative, to reach out to citizens and say, okay, we've got these two options. What do you think?
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, as I read through the motion and the proposal, I really like the youth council idea, like Councillor McCrae brought up. Three initiatives for the youth. I view this as too small, to be honest with you. I think having the youth involved to do 3 big projects throughout the township would be great, but I like the grassroots thing where neighborhoods come together. And so I would put more money at this and have neighborhood groups come together and ask for projects. So what I see here is staff or staff with the help of CSAC. I don't know that there's a need to put another committee together to come up with a criteria that is very, very straightforward and simple so that people can fill it out easily, but we have to have a way of tracking taxpayers' money. And I think the CSAC committee, when we last sent it back to council, there was a fair bit of community grant money that was left over, and we had earmarked some of that for this purpose. So I would suggest that we use some of that. If we're going to try and make this an ongoing thing or do it as a test, maybe we use half of it this time to figure this out, and then take the rest of it for the next year, the year after, because that money is there and it was approved by council to be spent on community initiatives. And this, to me, neighborhood communities is a great initiative. We've had a lot of people move into this community during COVID that don't know our community, don't know where they're living because we've been in lockdown since they've moved here. And I think neighborhood get-togethers, and whether they're in the local park or whether it's 2 blocks or 3 blocks of people getting together to get to know each other, is great. I would love to see it extended to the rural community, Councillor Kittredge, if there was a way to get a group of rural residents to come together and do something. I think that would be really good. But I think the money there, the CSAC committee identified that for you. And so I would prefer to do it that way with the youth group, staff, and the CSAC committee.
Councillor McElwain?
Thank you, Mayor. There is some synergy between the two approaches. And I think that from my perspective, that the task force concept that Stephen brought forward would be a great vehicle for launching the neighborhood approach that Kendra presented. So I really like the task force and having citizens involved in developing the whole program, not having it run by staff. And so following Stephen's recommendation, but adding a little bit to it in implementing the program that Kendra has proposed. So it's kind of accepting the best of both worlds, if you like, as one single approach instead of splitting them up. And the youth council certainly could be part of the task force. There's no question of it. I don't think the youth council is the right vehicle for running the task force or running the approach that Kendra has presented. So I think the neighborhood task force is really the best approach to get started. And the length of time, Stephen has suggested 3 months to provide a document proposal or a document. If it takes longer, 3 months is pretty fast to get it together and to get a proposal together. So I would have liked to see it be a little bit longer.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks, through you, Mayor. Yeah, first I would like to say thanks to Councillor Kittredge for bringing this up, and I think it's wonderful that we're actually having this discussion. We're acknowledging the struggles within the community, and it's very important that we see that strong neighborhoods create a strong community. It's something we talk about all the time is small town feel, and how do we identify that, and how do we keep people thinking and feeling like they're part of this community. So I'm very thankful for having this as part of our agenda, Councillor Kittredge, and bringing it back. Your motion here in regards to having the task force, I do like the idea that it has a launch pad where somebody will be responsible to take care of it. But then the long term, that there's a grassroots that it continues to be built upon with grassroots community members, the youth group. But in order to get some of these grassroots things going, you sometimes need to have a place where it lands as a responsibility at the beginning that gets it going, gets those ideas together. And if Kendra can be part of that committee, that would be amazing as well. And then roll in all those ideas. And once it's going, let's see where it can go and who can best handle certain different areas of certain portions to the youth groups. I really love the idea of getting the senior center involved, different aspects of it. There's so many parts of the community that can get involved in this. So you bring the youth and the seniors together, you bring, that's what makes strong communities. So I like the idea, and I believe we could bring something together moving forward with this task group.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, thank you, Councillor Kittredge, for bringing this forward. We all know mental health is an issue, especially during this pandemic. And I thank you for doing something to try to address it. I like the initiative, and Mayor, I'm prepared to second it so we can get it on the table. The only thing I'm not totally clear on is we're kind of dealing with two items at once here, and I'm wondering, are the two, I see they're complementary, of course, but are they mutually exclusive, or would we do one and then the other? Are we going to do both? I'm just not clear on which is first, or whether they're both on the table at once. In any case, I do like them both. So I'm speaking in favor of both items.
Yeah, thanks, councillors. Yeah, there's a lot of really good comments being made here. I like the concept of the youth council being involved. I also like the concept of the seniors being involved. That's nothing that we put in before. I really like that you know, generational connection there. I do think it's important to have accountability back for tax dollars spent. So that's, to me, where township staff come in. Whenever you're dealing with tax dollars, you have to make sure that there is an accountability back for what's spent, even if it's small amounts of money. So I think that's something that has to get ironed out as to where that fits. I personally don't think a new committee is required, but if we have a subcommittee that reports into CSAC, I think that could work, and still make sure that there's some synergies between that subcommittee and then CSAC. So, you know, I think there's some options here. So I wanted to thank Councillor Kittredge for putting this on our radar initially, and some of the comments there. And thanks, Kendra, for putting this pilot together. I like the idea of a pilot as well, because there's some moving parts here. And we know that now we really want this to be effective and grassroots. And so we might have to make some modifications to a pilot, and it's a lot better to go with a pilot when you're doing something net new. So I like the concept of it being a pilot. So I think we're in the right ballpark here. I'm just not exactly sure what the direction of council is. We wanted to have a wholesome, just referring to Councillor Foster's question, we wanted to have a wholesome discussion. That's why we pulled these two concepts together, because Kendra's also done quite a bit of research with other municipalities who have gone forward, and to get the best practices from them, as well as things that didn't work. So I'm sure she's able to answer those kinds of questions as well, because this isn't the first time this has been considered. Other municipalities have done it with differing degrees of success. We want to make sure that we're learning from that. So to me, it's important. I completely hear that councillors recognize that this has to be grassroots, recognize that it can't be something that's sterile. It has to be neighborhood based. They like the youth component to it. So I'm looking for a suggestion from council on where we want to take this one. Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. As people councillors have suggested, they are complementary. Mine is very, very short. I know some people think that's maybe too short, but I am not. I'm looking to start something, and then it goes to CSAC, and which is where I think it should be, because that's where the granting process works. I am not focusing on the granting. I think there's a lot of community neighborhood things that can, and ways of starting this that is more spontaneous and more just very grassroots, just doesn't require granting. But I understand when I was speaking with Kendra that, and also when we had the granting grants, that there were some provisions made for some monies, that would be part of perhaps this whole process. And so I think that if we could pass mine to just start, get the neighborhoods recruited, those people can continue. But basically it's only for a short period of time. The reason I made it short was I feel that once you start something, there's a lot of energy at the beginning. And if you can have a document very quickly, then it can be passed on and something else to work with. I've been on committees before where if there's too long of a deadline, it wears down and you don't get product, like you don't get the feedback and it made concretely. At the present time, like I'm a little bit concerned about staff presenting too heavily their ideas first and not having the citizens come up with their ideas. And that's where I sort of feel mine comes in, to start there. And then it goes back, it goes longer term once you want to get into the granting, and Kendra and the CSAC can help in that area. Because that's not where, originally when I had this, I was going to provide funds, but I totally changed that whole thing because of some of the comments made. And I felt that there was a real desire from the CSAC committee to provide granting, and it seems appropriate. But I think that a lot of this, some of this doesn't require money. Like some of it is just neighborhood getting together and caring for, you know, people in your community. And that's also why I wanted to have some farm communities. I'm rural, and rural suffers a lot. Like they need community as much as anybody. And if we can figure out some ways of helping them too, I really want to have that as part of this. So that's my words.
I'm gonna go to you in a second, Councillor McCray. I just wanted the idea of setting up a committee. That's not like flipping on a switch. So I just want councillors to be aware of when you set up a new committee, staff are involved from day one. You don't just handpick citizen committee members. You have to go out through a whole process. So the thought that we can turn on a switch and do this tomorrow and then just go with it. Staff will be involved, and as council, we have to appreciate its staff level of effort if we move ahead on something like that. So consider that. It's not just let's set up a committee and run with it. Councillor McCray? Oh, sorry, Andy, did you want to mention that? Because I want us to make sure we know what we're talking about here.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Linton, through you. So just a suggestion as I'm hearing the discussion, we talked about the youth, we talked about the seniors, we're talking about residents. Wondering whether council would be open to, we could have this discussion at CSAC. We've got a cross section of the community at CSAC, including youth members, senior member organizations. And we could, show them the two options and how they may be able to blend together, and ask for their input. Councillor McCray, you had mentioned a survey. Well, here would be a simple, quick way to be able to have a discussion with existing advisory committee members that are volunteers that although they sit on the committee from one organization or another, they are representative of other groups in their organization, in the community, as well as in their own neighborhoods. So just looking as to how to move that forward, to the mayor's point, and to get a whole new committee up and running would take some time. But if we could use one of our existing committees to say, here's the options, brainstorm some options and things of nature to come back to council in a very short time frame, we may be able to turn this around a little bit quicker than looking to establish a whole new committee. So just a discussion, an option, as I heard some of the discussions today.
So, and then just adding on to that, Andy, potentially Councillor Kittredge could attend that meeting just to make sure the whole story was getting out, and make sure that he had the opportunity to connect with CSAC. That might be a good opportunity.
Yep, I would see that as an opportunity, and Kendra could talk, and then I'd see it just as a discussion piece to get some early feedback from volunteers already in our community without establishing a brand new committee right away.
And I do think it really is important to get this right as good as we can. I really don't want us to move too quickly. I know there's an urgency here, and I know we want to get moving on this, but we don't want to do this wrong right out the gate, because we want to have people having really good experiences because we thought this through. So that might be an option, that we can take some of the ideas in both these options and present it to an existing committee. Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. What I was going to suggest was if maybe the committee that Councillor Kittredge was proposing could focus on reviewing the research that Kendra has done to determine an appropriate Centre Wellington approach. So whether this is an entirely separate committee that Councillor Kittredge is recommending, or as we've just heard from CAO Goldie, is to use the existing CSAC committee to do that and have Councillor Kittredge involved, whether that they're pulled out into a subcommittee to look at it. But I'd like to see Councillor Kittredge involved in this, as this was his idea. I think it's an excellent idea. And then how to bring together the research that Kendra's already done. Let's go through that and identify what is most appropriate for our needs. And then going forward, decide, is it the youth council and seniors that are going to sort of manage the process going forward under the direction of CSAC?
Councillor McElwain?
Thanks, Mayor. Just a quick clarification. Councillor Kittrus has actually asked for a task force, not a committee, a short-term task force, which I believe is quite different than setting up a committee of council. So I don't think the overhead of getting that started up is as much, although I certainly agree. I think Kendra should be on that task force along with Stephen and citizens, and then following Councillor McCrae's suggestion of going through what the work that Kendra has already done and providing a report to CSAC. I think once again we're kind of combining the best of both of them, but it's a short-term task force. It's not a committee of council.
Any other comments from council? Councillor Kittrus?
I made this because I feel that individual citizens and neighborhoods that maybe have not been on a chance to be in committees, but that are very neighborhood focused and have good ideas could maybe be on this. I understand that staff has time, but if you're going to have grassroots, you need to have like some way of getting the input, like Kendra and also Councillor McCrae has suggested. So I could work with the CSAC as a subcommittee if I make a presentation and maybe some of them want to start on it. But I do see that you'll need to have a lot of just ordinary people making suggestions to build it together, because I feel like it's something that my read when I am in the community is that people are really wanting something to make our community better and be connected to it, because they're feeling like it's growing too fast, and I see that this is a way of doing something. So anyway, that's just my thought.
So potentially the way forward then is, as you mentioned, Councillor Kittrus, is to start things off as quickly as possible with you doing a presentation with Kendra at CSAC and see where you guys land. Have a fulsome discussion with the group and talk about what a subcommittee would look like and how to go through that process, because there's some pretty substantial criteria in your notice of motion about what sorts of people would fit on this committee. So it's not just about going out on the street and picking people. So there is a process. And so if you could work with CSAC and the group there to identify that and bring an approach back to council, I think that would be the best way of kind of kicking something off and bringing something to council that has a little bit more meat to it, that takes some of the components of Kendra's research along with the focus that you want this to be grassroots and neighborhood based, and see what that looks like, and then bring that back to council. So if everybody's okay with it, can I do I would like us to drive to action on this one as quickly as possible. So that's a way that we could kind of start this right away. Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, I was just going to ask Councillor Kittrus if he would be acceptable to a motion to refer this to the CSAC committee based on a presentation by himself and Kendra to form a subcommittee under the CSAC committee. I think that might be the most expedient way to get this on the table and get us moving forward with it. I would be willing to put that motion in, but I'd like to see if Councillor Kittrus is willing to have that happen.
I can work with that.
Okay, so that's the motion I move.
I'll second
Councillor
that.
Kittrus, you want to second it?
Yes.
All in favor? And that's carried. That's exciting. Thanks for the work, Councillor Kittredge, and thanks, Kendra. Looking forward to you guys having a really good discussion at CSAC. Good work. Okay, moving on to information items. We have one information item that we received from the Integrity Commissioner for information for council. Nothing that council has to do with that. Any comment from council? Just the information item that we received. Okay, moving on to bylaws. I have a recommendation that bylaws 2021-11 through 2021-15 be read a first, second, and third time and passed, signed by the mayor and clerk and the corporate seal affixed. Mover for that, please. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Kittredge. All in favor? And that is carried. Confirmatory bylaw that the bylaws 2021-16 to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting held March 29th, 2021 be introduced the first, second, and third time and passed in open council. Mover for that, please. Councillor Van Leeuwen, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? And that's carried. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Kittredge, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? And we are adjourned. Good meeting. Have a good rest of the day.